Hey, expert investors, what's your biggest fear when it comes to owning and managing, being a landlord, your rental properties? And for me, when I was just getting started, it was how to deal with a tenant who's not paying the rent. You know, how do you deal with it? Not just deal with it, how do you deal with it successfully? Either get them to pay or get them out of the property. And it's a tricky conversation because you never want to remove somebody for your property. But if they're not paying, there really is no other choice at that point. If you've given them every opportunity to pay or to repay what they owe, you need to retake your home back and re-rent it to someone else who is willing to pay. Okay, so you are offering a product, or you are offering a service or a product, however you want to describe it, and you need to be compensated fairly. So if someone's not paying, what do you do? Communicate. Number one, about 50% of your problems will be solved if you can communicate with the tenant, and not just communicate, but you're going to have to be in touch with their feelings. So imagine now that you're a tenant and in any situation, and for some reason you cannot pay. And let's assume that this situation is maybe not their fault. Maybe they've lost their job suddenly, or they've had a significant person in their family pass away and it's distracting them from their work, or there's some emergency that's happened that's preventing them from paying the rent. It could be preventing them from paying for other lifestyle expenses also. So it may not only be you that's waiting for money. Now they're going to be in a situation where they feel panicked. They may not want to communicate. So if you come at them with like, "Hey, where's my money?" and "You need to pay me now, or I'm going to kick you out," what are the chances that they're going to respond to you? Zero. So, let's be honest with ourselves and put yourself in their shoes. So, would you want someone to communicate with you that way? Absolutely not. So, if you start out by saying, "Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, I see you haven't paid the rent. You know, maybe there's something in your life going on that you can't control. I want you to know before anything that I'm here to help. If you need a couple extra days to pay or an extra week to pay, I'm happy to negotiate that with you and to give you as much leeway possible, or to maybe refer you to someone who could help you with this specific issue." Okay? If you come at them with that kind of energy, they're going to feel like you're on their side. And will they communicate with you? Yes. If they feel like you're going to help them, are they going to communicate with you? Very likely. Okay? They may not. But it's how you communicate that's much more important than what you communicate or how fast you communicate. Now, just because you do communicate and you communicate effectively, it doesn't mean that you do not do the appropriate paperwork. If you're watching this and you're in Ontario where I am, you need to file your N4, and after a couple of weeks you need to do your L1 if they haven't paid to get a hearing at the landlord and tenant board. Okay, but wherever you're watching this, you need to still file the appropriate paperwork. So you got to do the paperwork that's going to open up the legal routes for you to evict or to enforce payment, or enforce whatever legal provisions you have in the province or state that you're in. Okay, so the paperwork is definitely important, but I wouldn't wait. If the law or the guideline is the same as ours, and ours within 3 days of non-payment, you file what's called an N4. Okay, and that gets that process started. Okay, whatever it is, I'm filing it on that date. Even if I've granted them an extra week to pay, I'm still providing that N4 on the earliest possible date. Again, with the proper communication, saying, "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tenant, this is an N4. It's a notice I'm obligated to provide as a landlord when there is non-payment of rent. If you do go ahead and catch up on your rent and we don't have any further issues, then this piece of paper is essentially useless and you can throw it right in the garbage. However, if we don't catch up, or for some reason you're not able to hold up your end of the bargain, then I have to continue with the paperwork, and this is what you can expect. Okay? So they never want to be surprised. Can you imagine you're in this panic and you can't pay your rent and you're trying, and all of a sudden this mean landlord comes and says, hey, here's your N4, here's your paperwork, here's your eviction letter. Is that what you want to hear? No. But if you communicate what it is, they still might be upset, but at least they know what's going on, and they don't think of you as the enemy. That's what you're trying to avoid at all costs. So you need to do the legal paperwork. Okay, representation. So if it's going to be a tricky case, or the tenant has different claims about you, maybe they feel you didn't provide enough maintenance to the property, there's some maintenance issue and that's why they're withholding rent, or you did something, you entered the property when you weren't supposed to, or there's some other reason behind them withholding rent or not paying, and you're confused and don't know what to do, don't think. Immediately find representation. Here in Ontario, that's usually done via paralegal. You don't need a lawyer. In fact, most lawyers won't even take on a case like this because they're busy doing other things. There are paralegals who specialize in landlord and tenant board matters, and their fees are much more, let's say, a lot cheaper than lawyers. I don't know any other way to say that. So if you need a referral for a lawyer, or a paralegal in Ontario, I can refer you to a handful who are really good and actually handle my stuff in the few instances that we do have stuff going on with tenants. Okay? And last but not least, prevention. I'm going to write this better. Sorry, my handwriting is not great. Prevention is your best weapon against having to deal with an eviction, bad tenant, a non-paying tenant, anything of that sort. Okay, so there's a rule, and it's called the 10% rule, and it goes something like this: in your career as an investor or as a landlord, if 10% of your tenants are going to be awesome people that you connect with, and people you want to invite over for dinner. Okay, they're going to be great, and you're going to tell stories about how awesome they are and how awesome they were after they leave your property. Okay, and then you're going to have another 10% of your tenants who are going to be the complete opposite, where those are going to be the horror stories you tell 5-10 years later. Oh, I remember that tenant. And most people are going to fall somewhere in the middle. Now, if you're like me and you like to learn the hard way, you're going to go through a period where you deal with that bottom 10%, and then you're going to get smart and you're going to say, if I can avoid that bottom 10% to begin with, 90% of my problems are going to go away. So that's what I teach everybody now, who I coach and mentor to become great real estate investors, is that if you can avoid that bottom 10%, 90% of your problems are going to go away before they ever begin. Okay? And yes, there are people out there who look to take advantage of landlords. It sucks, but that's the truth. And there are people who are applying for units for rent, houses for rent, apartments for rent, who are not responsible for their money. Okay, there are landlords who are not responsible with their money also. So this isn't, we're not trying to attack tenants here. Okay, but the reality is it's your duty as a landlord to find the best person for your unit. And you want the tenant to prove as much as possible that they are responsible enough to pay the rent on time and consistently. And I found over 10 years of doing this and coaching hundreds and hundreds of investors that 99% of the time, the landlord, the tenant wants to pay the rent. They don't want problems. They don't want fights. They just want to pay the rent. They want to have the roof over their head. They want everything to work, and they want to go about their lives. Okay? And there are some people who are not responsible. So if you can avoid those people, 90% of your problems are going to go away before they ever begin. Okay? Now, how do you do that? Without making another long video here, there are multiple ways. Obviously, credit checks and applications, verifying income is another one. And there are some fantastic screening tools that we're going to talk about in another video coming up. But for now, I want you to remember these things. When there's a non-payment of rent issue, it's communicate early and often. Paperwork. Don't slack. And even if you make a deal with them to pay back the rent late in a week or 2 weeks, you still need to file your paperwork on time. Number 3, representation. If you're confused, if you're scared, if you're nervous, if you don't know what to do, get a paralegal as soon as possible. I can give you some referrals. And if you don't want this stuff to happen at all, prevention is your best medicine. Talk soon.